Coming up.
I thought Facebook was going to change the world. People deserve to know the truth.
The explosive story Mark Zuckerberg tried to bury. A senior Facebook insider spilling their biggest secrets. What's happening inside the world's most powerful tech giant is unbelievable.
In private jets, there's often a bedroom for the boss. She asked me to come to bed with her.
Hello again and welcome to our 60 Minutes podcast, Extra Minutes. My name is Dimity Clancey and joining me today is our producer, Hannah Bowers. Welcome, Hannah.
Thanks, Dim. Good to be here.
Let's get straight into it because it's the book that everybody is talking about right now. It's called Careless People and it's written by a woman named Sarah Wynne Williams. Tell me a little bit about Sarah.
Very interesting. Sarah's not someone that's a household name. People don't know Sarah, but they are getting to know her and her career after she's put out this book. So she's a former diplomat. She was born in New Zealand. And she's had a really interesting career in the tech world, and she's sort of spilling some behind-the-scenes details in this book about her 7 years spent at what's now called Meta, but she worked for Facebook in a really senior role, eventually climbing the ranks to be the Director of Public Policy there. So that was a really interesting role for her. Essentially, she was sort of trying to... she actually pitched the role to Facebook because she saw a gap there where there was this social media network that she saw this huge potential to sort of, you know, really connect people. It was going to influence maps. It was going to influence elections, she says. She just saw this potential there for Facebook to have someone thinking globally about how this works in all these different countries. And so she pitched herself as somewhat of a Facebook diplomat. It took a few goes, but eventually she got through the door, and she was working extremely closely with Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg, all the top dogs there at Facebook.
What exactly did she do in her role? I mean, she kind of went into an area, in like an untapped area that, you know, the likes of Mark Zuckerberg had not even really thought about yet.
That's right, and that's what makes, I mean, I thought it was an interesting insight in the book, those sort of behind the scenes moments where she's really orchestrating meetings and one-on-ones and trying to get into different functions so that her bosses can have important FaceTime really with and one-on-one time with people around the world, because she saw the influence that Facebook could have on things like elections, on things like legislation, regulation. So she does write of some moments where she's up against the clock there. She's trying to get her boss to various meetings and
take some interest in politics, right? I mean,
That's
Zuckerberg,
right.
she says, just didn't really have any idea or couldn't fathom exactly the impact that this massive platform that he created could have around the world. You know, there's the 2016 Trump election victory.
Yeah, well, that's one of the interesting things, I think, is this portrait that she paints of Mark Zuckerberg isn't necessarily, I guess, what you'd call flattering in some ways. Someone that's created something as big as Facebook, you might think that Zuckerberg would have a really strong interest in politics, but not so, according to Sarah in this book. She says that it took a while for Zuckerberg to really comprehend and to understand the role that Facebook actually played in the 2016 election. Facebook was working closely with the Trump campaign. That's been sort of well documented, I guess, in the fallout from that eventual victory. But she sort of, I mean, from your reading of it too, like she paints this image of him really having to have it spelt out for him exactly what
them to have to explain. Well, you know, Mark, if you can influence the brand of toothpaste people are buying with your platform, you can influence how people vote. I think that's what she said.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, it sort of, things did eventually click, I guess, that I've created this thing, and this thing has put someone like that in the White House, and this is how I've actually played a role here.
And he liked it too, didn't he?
Well, that's the inference that she draws in the book. She sort of writes that suddenly after that had sort of clicked that, we've created this thing and look at what's happened, she sort of suggests that Mark Zuckerberg was interested in running for president. And that he soon after began a bit of his own little tour through some of the swing states of the US. He's sort of publicly denied that he's going to run for president or anything like that. But she said that he went so far as to sort of change the structure of the company to allow him to step away for 2 years if that was to be the case. So just interesting insights into the man.
It's a great insight. And the funny thing is, when this story first came to 60 Minutes, we didn't, we were approached by the publisher. And normally you get notice with a publisher, but this one we were given 1 week's notice that this book was coming out. Tell us about why that was.
Well, I think it's because of the insight that's offered in the book. It's quite salacious at times. And as it turned out, Sarah and the publishers were right to be worried about Facebook's response.
Well, they're going up against Facebook, right, by releasing this book.
Yeah. And, Facebook's not that happy with obviously about some of the things that Sarah's disclosing here. It's touched a nerve.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're onto something juicy when suddenly you've got Facebook gagging her, and so to our understanding that not long after we recorded our interview, Sarah was served with papers from a US court gagging her from talking publicly about her book and what she had written. So no more promotion, no more talking about it.
It's quite an extraordinary intervention when you think about it, in terms of what Facebook's supposed to stand for and what it stands for, connecting people. It stands for sort of free expression and people being able to have their say.
Well, many would find that hypocrisy unbelievable.
That's right. And particularly at a time when Facebook is sort of trying to align itself with, I guess, potentially more the Trump administration way of thinking. They've wound back the fact checking on Facebook to say they need to get back to their sort of free speech roots. That's what Zuckerberg said earlier this year. So the timing is interesting, but I guess when you're as big as Facebook, if you don't like something, I guess you can do what you like and you can try and shut it down. But ironically, not shut it down, I guess, but stop Sarah from speaking about it. But ironically, I think the book sales are doing quite well.
Well, if you tell someone not to do something, what does somebody want to do? They want to go and read it. Like, what are you hiding? Why can't we, freely go and have a look at this book?
So it's sort of amplified some of the stories. And there are some pretty interesting moments in the book.
Let's talk about some of the explosive claims in the book. Which ones have stayed with you?
Look, I was someone that read Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg's book originally. I think I was in university at the time, and it was a really interesting insight into women in corporate culture and how that might all unfold. And I think people really wanted to believe in that message, and sort of it's been a decent amount of time since that book was originally published. So I think some of her messages had already begun to be questioned and seen through a different lens in terms of how women might behave in the workplace and what they need to do to get ahead. But regardless, Sheryl Sandberg has been sort of a feminist corporate icon so far. So I think some of the stories that Sarah writes about are just a little bit jarring, I think, to hear.
Well, let's face it, flying around the world on a private jet is already a different world to what many of us would know in our day-to-day jobs.
Yes.
But it really is a world of its own. I mean, some of the yarns she talks about are just weird and
it's
bizarre.
Just a bit odd, and you got to remember that this is coming obviously from Sarah's perspective. It's her recollections, it's her book, it's from her perspective, and Sheryl Sandberg hasn't commented publicly yet on what Sarah has put out there. But there's one story that she tells where they're coming back from a conference, and I think from Davos, and Sheryl insists that Sarah get into bed with her, and there's one bed. Sarah says there's one bed on the private jet, and Sheryl came in and said, come to bed. And so it's just a bit...
It's kind of like, what does that mean? But it's like in any light, should your boss ever be saying, come to bed?
And she says that, Sheryl had an assistant who she sent off to buy thousands of dollars worth of lingerie, and that at points when they were travelling in cars, they'd be stroking each other's hairs, things like that. Some of them are just a bit odd, but then...
Certainly wouldn't happen with our boss, would it?
No, but then I guess the lean-in culture is also touched on by Sarah when she tells this story. She's giving birth to her first child. She's literally in the delivery suite, and she's sending emails to Sheryl
There's
Sandberg.
a little bit of that, though, where I'm like, that's on you. There's got to be a line. We're all really hard-working, working mums who have had babies, and you just... I don't know. There's a little bit of that where I'm like, oh, come on.
Well,
you know?
and
But
throughout
doesn't speak to the world, I guess. I don't know.
Well, throughout the book, you know, there are those moments, and in your interview with Sarah, she even admits that, I'm embarrassed about that. You know, I think maybe when she describes it as being a bit of a frog in boiling water. You're in this environment, things are just going and going in this kind of bizarre world that she paints. So as well as some tidbits about Sheryl Sandberg, she also mentions quite a few different little anecdotes about another one of her bosses, Joel Kaplan, who's still at Meta.
He is now the head of global policy, right?
That's right. Yeah. So he's quite senior at Facebook, at Meta, and during her time there, it's quite sort of uncomfortable reading, I guess, the bits that she talks about him. From her point of view, she says that he sort of conducted video conference calls from bed. After she'd given birth, he was questioning her about bleeding and breastfeeding. He would send her sort of weekly catch-ups while she was on maternity leave. Just a number of things. I think she said there was an event where he grinded up against her and called her sultry. And you
wonder how much the power that these people have in such a big company, how much that power plays into like the fact that they think they can do and say what they want.
Yeah, and it's difficult because obviously this is one side of what, and it's her recollections and that's what she's written in her book, and that's her sort of memories of working with him, I guess.
Well, Facebook did come out. They've come out in a series of public comments and a quite forceful response, really. They're calling her an anti-Facebook activist, which I thought was interesting. But in regards to Joel Kaplan, the company says it conducted a 42-day investigation and spoke to 17 witnesses. Meta concluded that Sarah made misleading and unfounded allegations of harassment. The company also said, though, that Sarah was fired for poor performance and toxic behaviour.
Yeah, look, and when you asked Sarah about that, she said it wasn't surprising that Meta's sort of trying to smear her rather than answer some of the claims in her book, the bigger sort of discussions, I guess, around it. So, yeah, look, that's, I guess, what Facebook's put on the record so far.
And so far, though, Joel Kaplan and Sheryl Sandberg have declined from commenting publicly about the allegations Sarah has made against them.
Yes, we haven't heard from them publicly, that's right.
The other ones that I found concerning was the targeting of vulnerable teenagers. Like if you know that that's going on in your company, that's really hard to swallow. That's hard to go home from the end of your day at work and go, oh, that's actually what I was instructed to do. Or I learnt that about what we're doing, So some context around that is that Sarah says that, if a 13-year-old takes a selfie with her phone and doesn't like the selfie and deletes it, she says Facebook has access to that information that it then can pass on as research to a beauty company, and then that beauty company, it triggers the beauty company to then offer her a product when she's feeling down. I mean, I've got kids that will one day be teenagers, not that far away, and you just go, oh, that's really scary. And that's not okay. And if you were working for a company okay, would you do it? Would you stay? I don't know.
Well, one of the things that stuck with me that Sarah said in her interview with you was, and she writes about it in the book, but the fact that a lot of these executives at companies like Facebook and Meta, they don't allow their own children to use the products that they develop. And you don't see Zuckerberg's kids on Facebook, and you've at some point you've got to ask why, and they know why. You'd think. So you could tell that, there were obviously some moral questions that Sarah was grappling with during her time at the company. China was one of those as well. She was extremely concerned about Facebook's push to get into China, more so the way that they went about it. And she made quite a few interesting claims about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, bending the rules for one country, especially China, but also saying, she openly said that, but to other countries, if they asked for that same sort of concession, they would absolutely not. You're not having access to photo tagging and how we'd photo tag and things like that. But Sarah says, the curtain was pulled back for China, and it's concerning.
Well, Facebook they argue that, they don't operate in China, that they haven't found a way to do that, that these are old claims. That's sort of what they've come out and said publicly, sort of saying this isn't new.
Well, and they aborted the plan in 2019. But you have to think that if Facebook could ever get into China, they'd take, Mark Zuckerberg would take it, right?
Oh, you'd think so. And from Sarah's description, you're right. She sort of says they were willing to make all sorts of concessions to allow the CCP to be able to monitor their citizens, essentially. And it's I think it's a really interesting insight, only because, as you say, I doubt Facebook has totally abandoned all plans to target those very valuable data sets.
$18 billion made from China in the past year, and that's just without them having access, or without them actually operating in China at this point. The company's still making $18 billion.
It's a huge market. So, yeah, I think any insight from, Sarah's a real sort of insider here. She's in the mix. She was sort of leading some of these teams. You'd think that I think it's interesting to hear her point of view. Facebook can dispute it all it wants, but it's still at this point in time when China's such an important sort of fixture of the global landscape. I think it's a really interesting insight that she's offering.
And look, let's face it, so many have a Facebook account. Billions and billions of people around the world have Facebook. So it affects everybody. So many people have Facebook, but I guess, here in Australia, we're quite ahead of the game when it comes to that. And just recently, the Australian government is ramping up pressure on these big tech companies to regulate them and to make them, how they filter news content into the Australian market, and also looking at a ban for children.
Yeah, that's right. In Australia, we have sort of in the past negotiated these sorts of deals with the big tech companies that cost them money to be able to do what we've requested here in Australia. And you've got Elon Musk in the year of Donald Trump in the US now sort of saying, hey, let's not do this. Let's stop doing that. It's a waste of money. We don't need to do what Australia's asking. But we certainly are in a situation where we are sort of, some would argue world leading, others would say that we go too far. It depends where you fall on the spectrum. But we do have an e-safety commissioner here, for example, that hasn't been afraid to take on X or take on Facebook and try and get certain harmful materials taken down in the past when there's been sort of graphic videos circulating. We've requested that of those international companies. So for sure, I think, and even Sarah mentioned that on the harm it can do to teenagers. Yeah. Australia is at the forefront of trying to do something about it. Whether or not it's the right way or whether or not it's going to be effective is another matter. But it's definitely an interesting juncture at the moment, I think, because you do have these sort of tech bros in the White House. In some instances, there's a sort of an unwinding of some of the regulations and the safeguards that people might have found reassuring, like fact-checking or like content moderation that might stop harmful videos going out. There's sort of that tension between, I guess, free speech and that circulation of ideas. So it's definitely an interesting moment for these discussions, and I think that's why, it's been 8 years or so, I think, since Sarah Wynne-Williams worked at the company. But her argument was that now's the time, we're on the cusp of an AI revolution. Things are moving quickly, in this space. Her argument was that now's the time to have these tough discussions. And, her sort of snapshot in her book is from a period of time at Facebook, but I think it does give an insight into how decisions are made and what considerations.
Things can so quickly get away. And, if children are at risk, how quickly that damage and that danger can spread. So I think anything to better protect, first of all, young people, but everybody on Facebook and social media and things like that. You'd hope that you want to hope that these big techs have integrity when it comes to this. But you feel like when you read books like this that you're just like, it's just dollar signs, right?
That's right. And people might be critical of Sarah for, you spent a number of years there and now you're paying it and now you're sort of criticising it from the outside. But I think you do need people to stand up from the outside and do that, as tough as it might be to come up against your former employer. But I think she makes a valid point that sometimes that deserves some scrutiny and it deserves just a little bit of airing, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And it will certainly be interesting to see how that legal action that Facebook has launched against her plays out. But obviously, as we said before, if you tell someone not to do something, people are going to want to see it. And I think it's a number one book right now, isn't it?
It's doing pretty well, I think. It's in some of those top 10 lists. So if you tell someone not to read something or to watch something, they're certainly going to try and do the opposite.
Well, it's no wonder that that's the book everybody's talking about right now. Hannah, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks,
Much appreciated. Great insight. And you can watch our full story on the 60 Minutes YouTube channel as well as 9 Now. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.